Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to be looking at the new Kuva Sobek and its Augment Clip Delegation. Now, I've already done all the math in advance, and everything checks out as expected when we tested on stream yesterday. Do keep in mind, we will be simulating the effects of the Augment. As usual, this is a Tenet weapon, so make sure you finish the Sisters of Parvos quest and are grabbing candidate sisters by using a Zenith crown at the Golden Hand and Corpus capital ships and killing mobs in the tile set after. The main node for this is Hydra Pluto. You only need 25 kills in the Grandum mode. We pick Hydra because it will spawn a treasure after 3 minutes that can drop another Zenith crown. Don't leave the mission until it spawns. Okay, Progenitor speak. There are only two progenitors that matter, Toxin and Cold. If you're not using Saryn, you can always pick Toxin. This allows you to make corrosive if you want, or viral, which are the only two main elements you want on a Sobek. There is an edge case for an electric Sobek I can show later if you dislike using acid shells, but it is not recommended as the main option. The electric setup also obliterates Steel Path, but absolutely requires some kind of grouping to work, whereas the other Sobek setups do not care about abilities whatsoever. Okay, the Kuva Sobek. First and foremost, this thing has no extra bells and whistles over its normal variant. It's only a stat bump. 10% more crits, 0.3 times more crit damage, 4.8% more status per pellet, and with a 60% progenitor bonus, 616 base damage versus 350. I will explain why none of this matters later. Perhaps the most useful part is actually the reduction in reload speed from 2.7 to 2.1 seconds. That's actually the reason why I like the Kuva variant, but no wildfire. In my honest opinion, with respect to the meta space, the Kuva Sobek is pointless. Anything it achieves can be accomplished with the normal Sobek as well. There are no new builds or playstyles that the Kuva variant brings to the table. If you truly do not want to farm for this, then you are only losing out on mastery fodder. However, that does not mean Sobek is a bad weapon archetype. There have been a few new discoveries that apply to both Sobeks, so please bear with me. Acid Shells has always been the defining feature of Sobek up to this point. Without the Augment, the weapon is basically garbage, falling behind Boar and Strun Primes, even without their Incarnon variants. Because Acid Shells allowed Sobek to compete, Sobek's power ceiling is also limited by how Acid Shell works. Acid Shell cannot crit, cannot proc status, normally, and does not scale off of your weapon's damage. As a result, the increased crit, status, and innate damage of the Kuva variant does not allow the weapon to improve Acid Shell scaling. Also, Acid Shells is currently bugged as of the Dante line of sight changes where, just like Tragedy, random little rocks and even your pet or your sentinel can block the Acid Shell's AoE line of sight. DE, please fix. What the weapon stats increase do allow, though, is a faster and easier TTK to start the initial enemy killing for Acid Shell explosion cascades to occur. However, Acid Shells only deals 45% HP damage and does not bypass armor. Even after the upcoming armor changes, the 90% damage reduction cap on enemies still cuts this 45% down to 4.5%, making Acid Shells useless without armor strip, unless you're using Saryn or Lavos. Therefore, because Acid Shells is the best way to scale Sobek and it literally doesn't work without full strip on most frames, the Kuva variant stat bumps are not useful because the normal Sobek never had issues with killing armor stripped enemies for Acid Shells in the first place. To further compound the issue, if you are a Riven user, the disposition gap between the two allows the normal Sobek to match Kuva Sobek's personal damage even when we take Acid Shells out of the picture. The other situation with the Sobek family is that because Acid Shells is so powerful and does not scale with crit, then there's no point modding crit on an Acid Shell Sobek to start with. This means you free up 2 mod slots. The Kuva variant allows you to choose an elemental progenitor to free up 1 more mod slot. You now have 3 mod slots. Sobek does not have enough useful mods to scale Acid Shells further with the said 3 free mod slots. In other words, Kuva Sobek's saved mod slot does not improve build diversity. What does matter though is the upcoming Nightwave Augment Clip Delegation. This is a rank 15 Nightwave reward in current patch, and it will take you about 2.5 to 3 weeks from the date that this video releases for you to reach. I strongly advise grabbing this because the star of the show is not Kuva Sobek's variant, but rather this augment. In light terms, this augment triples to quadruples the damage potential of the Sobek on raw hits, and allows it to actually function even without Acid Shells as a viable Steel Path crowd clearer, and a much better tool for setting off Acid Shell explosions in the first place. Let me explain. It gives up to 225% multi-shot and 225% status chance with 15 hits on your next magazine. Once you proc it once, you can very easily keep it proc for the rest of the mission. It is basically galvanized multi-shot stacked with 3 to 4 status chance mods all wrapped in one. Yes, you should be able to slot this with acid shells, because Tenet Tetra is able to slot both its augments at the same time. I do not know whether this is 15 pellets or 15 trigger pulls, but the Sobek has a mag size of 20. You are allowed to completely whiff up to 5 shots at worst case, and I'm pretty sure if you landed even one pullet out of the spread, it counts as a success. I don't even know if punch through will count extra targets individually or not. Worst case scenario, you can mod on 1+ magazine mod. Sobek actually has the space to slot that, after all, and this augment is so strong that it is worth losing a mod slot to do this. Whether math for this augment is relevant in builds, I will demonstrate later. Now, about Shattering Justice, the third augment. It is only 90% status chance, and is an incredibly weak option for our builds today, so I will not be using it. The Justice effect deals blast damage, heals 25% health, and gives plus 15% armor. I really don't think it's needed since we have much better ways to heal these days, and it can also only proc once every 30 seconds. Alright, let's look at the obvious choice first, Saryn. Now, this is the low-hanging fruit and is a template Saryn I'm using. It is not a Saryn guide, we're only explaining Saryn mechanics with Sobek. The reason why Saryn works well, and Zada's Whisper, alone, not together with Saryn, but Zada versus Toxin Lash. The reason why Zada does not work with Sobek outside of full strip is because Saryn's Toxin Lash applies an extra hit that also applies a dot and can kill over time. Zada's Whisper does not apply the dot. Okay, so this dot scales off of your entire weapon's original damage. In this case, Acid Shell Explosion can proc Toxin Lash, scaling off the explosion. However, Toxin Lash double dips Toxin mods and triple dips Banes, both by taking your weapon's damage, which includes Toxin mods and Banes, and then taking the final hit and multiplying it by Toxin percent present on your loadout again. Because Toxin Lash is scaling off of Acid Shells here though, which does not scale off Toxin mods, then it only single dips Toxin. However, this allows you to create an Acid Shells dot multiplied by Toxin percent, so that she can mod on big Toxin mods onto Sobek directly, there to further increase Toxin Lash's damage when it spreads via Acid Shells. Therefore, the Sobek build for Saryn looks like this. Remember, cold Progenitor so we can make viral with one mod. Similar to all Acid Shell builds today, we will not be using crit mods because it does not affect the explosion scaling. All builds will be using the top row of mods. This is because Sobek can independently produce 4 status effects for Gun CO for plus 320% base damage. Punch Through allows it to tag multiple enemies at once, softening up enemies for Acid Shell explosions, or triggering multiple kill explosions instantly. The Bane is extremely important because it is one of the very few ways to increase Acid Shell's AoE damage. It multiplies the 45% HP scaling by 1.55 to now deal 69. Nice percent HP damage. A single viral proc would boost the receiving target over 100% health taken on armor strip. Now, Saryn doesn't care about armor strip, because even with that in play, they will die to the subsequent Toxin Lash ticks, which will then trigger their own AoE Toxin Lash procs and ticks again from Acid Shells. Contagious Spread is used because it improves Toxin Lash scaling, literally by 1.9 times. Amalgam Shotgun Barrage is used for extra fire rate, and I would say one source of fire rate on Sobek is enough for it to feel comfortable. You could double slot by using Arcane Tempo 2 instead if you really want to. Now, if you're using the normal Sobek, this fire rate mod is the one you drop, and you run Arcane Tempo instead, which only costs about 30 platinum for a rank 5. The Sobek shoots out 16.5 pellets at once per shot when Galvanized Multi-Shot is stacked. You have a very high chance of activating Arcane Tempo despite the 15% activation rate, since each pellet crit is tracked independently for the activation condition. Acid Shells obviously would be in the last slot, and this empty slot is for the future augment. In the meantime, I would recommend running a 60/60 Toxin mod to further boost Toxin Lash scaling until you get Delegation clip. On the normal Sobek, before you get the augment, you can just slot a cold mod here. Merciless is used to cut reload speed down to 1.5 seconds on the Kuva variant. The normal variant would be reduced to 2.1 seconds. The next build is more all-purpose for any frame that wants to run Acid Shell Sobek with full strip. There is a steel pad circuit build coming next for that particular case, but this is for normal use. Anyways, Toxin Progenitor for this one. We still bring the same top row of mods, because punch through allows us to soften up targets for acid shells while also increasing the likelihood of starting multiple explosions at once when shooting. Bane is needed and will be in all builds because it multiplies acid shell damage up to 69% HP. I will assume you can figure out how to build your frames for full armor strip because this setup doesn't work unless you do that. The only difference is running Chilling Reload instead of a Toxin mod from Saryn so that we can further cut down reload time to just 1.2 seconds with Merciless too. Some people might mention Shotgun Vendetta, and I have a reason why I'm not using it besides it just being too expensive for most players. When the augment from Nightwave arrives, it will triple the raw DPS of this weapon, making it much easier to start acid shells explosions. But more importantly, it allows you to reach 10 viral stacks in a single shot. Let's look at the quick math. Currently, if I use this build and only swap the arcanes around, Vendetta will give me 7.1 viral procs on average per shot, per enemy hit, whereas Merciless gives 4.6. Just to show this math is accurate, this is me shooting enemies on the Merciless build with fully stacked galvanized multi-shot. Notice how 2 shots is roughly enough to max out to 10. Now, because Kuva Sobek spits out so many pellets per shot, you're very likely to trend status procs towards the average expected due to the larger sample size. Okay, so Vendetta clearly applies more viral stacks, allowing me to kill with acid shell explosions easier, right? Well, once you add the new augment in, this is what happens. Remember that Delegating clip grants plus 225% multi-shot and plus 225% status chance. Vendetta setup will now deal 20 viral procs per shot, and the Merciless build will grant 15 per shot. But viral stacks are capped to 10. Therefore, it will be better to just run Merciless, which is cheaper and easier to track since Vendetta requires you to get kills within 5 meters of you every 15 seconds, whereas Merciless just needs kills in general, which is obviously easy to do with acid shells and full strip. Not hard, but Merciless is much more brain dead. For the normal Sobek, if you don't have the Kuva one, just drop Shotgun Barrage to slot a mod to make viral and run Arcane Tempo. Now, the third build is specifically for Steel Path Circuit. There, you cannot control what Warframe you get and whether you have full armor strip or not. Therefore, we take a Toxin Progenitor with this build. The biggest difference is actually building for crit. Steel Path Circuit does not have dense enemy spawns like normal Steel Path, and thus, you do not need to bring Punch Through. Instead, we dropped Fire Rate and Punch Through for critical deceleration and hunter munitions. Now, this is an odd build, let me explain. You do not need crit damage because your decrees will feed into your base damage high enough. Just being able to slash more often is enough because that damage will allow you to bypass armor completely and is also buffed by decrees. Bypassing armor is much more important than buffing crit damage. This allows the build to kill single enemies even if you don't have a frame with armor strip and circuit. If you want better fire rate, you can drop the Bane for Amalgam Shotgun Barrage since it is not as important since fodder enemies die somewhat easily and Thrax units are not affected by Banes. We still take Chilling Reload to make viral with the Toxin Progenitor, both to buff slash procs, but also in the case you do have an armor strip frame, you can apply viral to make acid shell killing easier. The empty slot again is for the augment. I would honestly not recommend picking Sobek and Circuit unless you either have an armor strip frame or you picked up the Nightwave Augment to put in this empty slot. Now, the last build was a question asked on stream yesterday. What if you don't want to use acid shells? Is it possible to make Sobek work without it? And without relying on armor strip? What if you use grouping and electric? The answer is yes, it actually works. However, of course, you have to use an electric progenitor. But also the other caveat is it needs the Nightwave Augment for this. I would recommend having a Sentinel or Panzer to prime viral for you since we don't mod it on Sobek as we want to buff the electric scaling as high as we can. Punch through is extremely important on this grouping setup since we're tightening enemy density to the max. The more enemies you can shoot through, the more electric procs you can spread to shock everything via chaining mechanics. Bane is obviously required because it double dips the electric procs for 2.4 times more damage. Crits are used because they scale into electric DPS, unlike acid shells. The final slot is for the augment. Now, this build is only worth using with the augment. Why? How much of a difference does it make? Well, here's the comparison. Empty slot on this build, 4.5 electric procs per shot. With the augment, 17.2 electric procs per shot. Almost quadruple the procs or 4 times damage scaling. Seriously. Again, grab the augment. Now I can simulate what this relative 3.78 times total damage increase with having the augment looks like to show you how strong it is. This is a Lavos with Roar, granting 94% Roar. That double dips for dot builds, granting me 3.78 times more damage instead of 1.94. I will use this exact build and go to shoot grouped enemies. I use Anomaly because, well, I'm using Roar to replace the Augment, so I can't use Air Burst or Ensnare, such as if I did have the Augment. Now, look at how they die so quickly. I would rate this to work up to level 300 Steel Path near instantly one-shotting most fodder and 3-shotting heavy units when you group. All kinds of grouping work, be it Ensnare, Air Burst, or Larva. And I would say it's still viable up to level 1000 in current armor scaling before the changes. After the changes, it will probably work all the way up to level cap. Would I recommend building the Electric Sobek setup? Honestly, no, it's much higher effort than Acid Shells. However, it works. So if you want something different, then feel free to try this out. And because normal Sobek can make the same builds as Kuva Sobek, then a wrong element Progenitor, read Electric Progenitor, can still make all of the viral Acid Shell builds I showed earlier too. The Steel Pad Circuit build would not be able to run Bane or Fire Rate though on an Electric Sobek, since that slot would be for the cold element to make viral. That's it for this video. Cheers. Stay tuned for the Glaxion video. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always as soon as possible, like I've done with the Dante updates. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. Don't miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching and see you all next time.